Well, hi, thanks so much for having us, Claire. My name's David Johnston. I'm now currently working at the ANU, at the School of Archaeology and Anthropology. I'm both on as a staff member, where I'll be teaching doing an Indigenous cultural competency mentorship program for students and staff, of those who'd like, where I'm bringing in elders, my own teaching, to ensure that we have a cohort of future students who are very clearly aware of Indigenous people's history and a connection to the country through our own voices and words, by bringing the various elders in, so that we can actually engage with our students, so that you're fully aware of what our requirements are, how to work with Indigenous people, how not to be racist, how not to appropriate our heritage and culture, and how to work effectively with us. It's about building a community, having equitable partnerships. So I'm really excited about that. My background is that I was a student here, one of only 5 Indigenous students back in 1986, with my colleagues, who were mostly mature age students. I was only 17 at the time. I studied archaeology and anthropology, graduated with honours in archaeology and anthropology in 1989. And I was lucky, and by that coincidence, I was Australia's first Indigenous academically qualified archaeologist. I've gone on to be set up as the founding chair of the Australian Indigenous Archaeologists. I've been an activist nationally in trying to protect, manage and get the recognition of the wealth and beauty and amazing antiquity of Australia's Indigenous people's heritage, all our many nations. At the same time, I've also made it a career, non-paid, as I'm very proud of the Australian National University. We set up the Jabal Centre in 1989. I've gone on to set up the Indigenous Alumni Network. What I saw was there was great need, having been only 5 Indigenous students, and some of the issues that we faced here. The Western Academy mindset, as well as in Australia, and how they treat and deal with Indigenous peoples. For example, there are over 137 courses being taught here on Indigenous knowledges aspects, most of which are not taught by Indigenous Australians. So there is still room for change, and it's something I'm proud of this university. I've been able to do a lot of work with the local elders, bring in community engagement and partnerships is something I'm very proud of. The efforts the ANU has taken. We've got a lot of steps still to go. And I'm pleased to be able to present here for PARSA, I think a very valuable postgraduate source, but also an opportunity to keep truth-telling, or even begin truth-telling on a range of Indigenous issues and societal matters that are important for everyone. So I thank you for the opportunity today. I do many, many, many things. It's an obligation as an Indigenous Australian to do with the privilege that I've got through my education, both here, from all those who taught me at the Australian National University. My great mentor here at this school, Emerita Professor Isabel McBride, one of Australia's greatest humanitarian and ethical archaeologists, who hasn't got her due, because both being a woman, not just here at ANU, but within the society of the Western discipline of a Western Academy, which is, I think, quite male-oriented and quite misogynistic, and flowing through it to the Australian National University. The history of archaeology and anthropology has very much been white male-dominated, still is. And we'll make that change. And I'm proud, however, to be here. I've been invited in, after all the years of stuff I've done, lobbied for ANU and Indigenous engagement. We did the Canberra developments with all the traditional owners, brought the traditional owners in now that they're regularly on campus, because while we have the Bush Tucker Gardens, the stories and histories of engagement, we still have 160-something courses teaching Aboriginal studies by non-Indigenous. Weigh that up. So we still have a long way to go, and having these voices and opportunities. So it's been a privileged path, but we can't just force it. We've got to go gently. We've got to get some of the racists out and have a free and frank discussion. I'm quite alarmed to hear that PARSA may be have their funding reduced, particularly given that there's no other Indigenous voices or that are independent from a student perspective to address some of the concerns that many of us feel still need to be addressed here. That is a concern, but we'll be taking action on that if our voices are being stifled for known unclear reasons, particularly on voices where we're dealing with inherent racism issues that still exist at the Australian National University. However, on the whole, there are some great works and things going, and I've been pleased to be involved in many areas. I'm doing things like Indigenous cultural competency. We're on the Aboriginal History Board. I'm setting up elders' positions at the schools and colleges. We've been doing Indigenous engagement for ANU, for not only the school and ARC and all the lecturers, to ensure that there's proper engagement, consultations, approvals. I've been assisting many other departments. I do regular lectures about Indigenous voices in the heritage area. But, you know, I challenged when the Indigenous Genomics Centre opened without any Indigenous consultation engagement. I've been around this is my 4th decade. So it's about truth-telling, and we don't shy away from those who stemy truth-telling. And we have not had the Black Lives Matter here in Australia, or we, more importantly, what should be called the, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Brown Lives Matter here in Australia. I was alarmed that the Australian National University, when we did a couple of years ago, we weren't allowed to have it on campus. We had to go off campus, which is something I would challenge with the administration, or we will as students and staff. I don't think that's acceptable. And if we hide that sort of denial of truth-telling reality at this university, that's a cause for alarm in a democratic university. I'm very proud of the Australian National University. I'm here now and with a scholarship as staff and student all those years in recognition of all the efforts and works I've done voluntary for the ANU over the years. I'm very proud, and I'll continue to be a straight supporter. But as a supporter, I can internally vocalise criticism where, issues that need to be changed, particularly if they are racist, or there's issues that are affecting the well-being of our multicultural community. Words are something, and actions at times are needed, particularly when there's blindsiding. And I've been around. I take mining companies to court for breakfast, so seeing the issues here which need to be addressed, they're blaringly obvious to all. We are an institution made of intelligent people. It's time to have some intelligent conversations and truth-telling. But we have come a long way. So has society. So we're on a good path. So how do we do it? Let's not stop funding PARSA to have an open voice admin. It'll come back to bite you, I can tell you, and it will. It's our free voice, it's student voice. We don't have student unionism anymore, but we do need to provide for a new generation of free students, whether it's radical or not. That's how we make change. When dinosaurs hang on to themselves, it becomes a dictatorial system. And look, we do need to, in both gender issues, equality in so many areas, multiculturalism, Indigenous, there's so much more to do. So let's aim together. So I see it more as we can open the conversation. It's a celebration. To close the conversation, history repeats, and so does the revolution. So where we go from here? Further Indigenous employment here for I'm the only Indigenous academic in a school that was where Australian archaeology started. I'm very proud to be here. Let's fill some of these traditionally white Western English people fill positions with some black seats on the, let us have an Indigenous academy here at ANU. We've lost the National Centre for Indigenous Studies. We've got the First Nations portfolio, but we're not car salespeople. Let's not, if you want to sell cars and make money, make your business. We want an academic independent body, and the loss of NCIS is an absolute travesty and tragedy for this university and academics like me to have an opportunity to be in an Indigenous centre. We've gone backwards tenfold, ANU, that we need to have our own centre. I'd like one day to have an Indigenous centre for archaeologies, of Indigenous archaeologists, in the School of Arc or something. And I'll get there, we'll get there. But you can't just continue appropriating, I'm saying this to all Australians, our history and culture treat us like shit without a voice, without looking at yourselves and ourselves as a nation and say openly and honestly who we are and truthfully as a nation. We need to truth tell, and we are so blinded by our prejudices, misogyny, greed and appropriational past, and the denial of history or fabrication of it, that we need to address that. Otherwise, the rest of the world sees us for what we are. And it's about time that we open. And if the institute like the ANU, the best university in the country, can't open its doors and lead the way on these bigger picture things that are all important to us, rather than just the Western Academy prejudices and bigotry, then we have problems, kids. Well, wouldn't that be a wonderful conference if we had a look on, I'd love to lead at a conference of free thinking, Indigenous knowledges, epistemologies, how we're addressing it at ANU, who's addressing it, who's teaching it, appropriating, or whatever word you like, and let's look at how we can make change. Indigenous knowledge and that peoples, we've been ripping off peoples for years, and not just here, all over Australia. So let's address that. Let's address, is it appropriate for all these non-Indigenous peoples to be teaching all this about our histories, heritage, genetics? Let's objectively look at the notion of that and how a societal sees this, one-sided approach. It is changing. There's opportunities with our Canberra scholarships. There's a lot happening. But what ANU does well is get us graduated Indigenous and then kick us out. Happened to me. It took me 35 years to get into my School of Archaeology. And I know how I was kept out because I've been told. And it's not a pretty story, and I'm not going to say it here. But here I am today, in my 4th decade of having graduated, getting recognised. I've won National Heritage Awards. I've done this. I do documentaries. I don't stop trying to engage in improving both the academic but an Australian situation on the wider picture of heritage. An individual can make a difference, and I'm not brilliant, but I certainly try. And I can see the things, what we can easily do here. But let's do it in a celebratory way. We're not into flogging and blaming people, but we also need to see ourselves for what we are and acknowledge that Western academies are traditionally, and using science or whatever, the dominant societal position to maintain that dominance, prejudice, racism, which affects the rest of us, and certainly Indigenous Australians. And we just have to look at gender equity over time. It's nothing. It's not different. These are bigger societal things. I'm not just saying this for ANU, but ANU. If we're here, we're the leading think tank, smartest mob in the world. Let's get this right. And I, as a Indigenous academic, proud student and member of staff of the School of Archaeology and Anthropology at the Australian National University, and one who will continue to voice for change and reasonable, rational, based on societal humanitarian principles. Indigenous Australians have a philosophy of caring for country, and that caring for country is that we are from country. So all Australians now are too, but it's about caring for self, caring for family, caring for our community, and having the ethical and moral leadership to lead firstly, and leave our country and our place in a better state for our grandchildren and children. Well, use that philosophy at ANU. Let's make the change the world that we'd like to see. And I don't see anyone else doing it than the leaders of our academic institutions, our greatest minds, young and old. I think we can do it in a spirit of celebration, and I would challenge at the Australian National University and our university board to consider how and ways that we actually are productive, deal with the big issues, lead Australia in our research, our ingenuity, but also of coming together. We are a multicultural country, utilising our Indigenous background and heritage with our elders and peoples that we have all on board now, but journeying, discussing, challenging and reconciling together. Firstly, it's by taking a step back. One of the things when we say for welcome to country is to stop, listen, learn. So, if you want to be more aware, let's get some Indigenous voices, some elders, some academics. Like for my career as an archaeologist, we could never do interviews because we had to have Ernie Dingo or someone, or some actor. Not Ernie's fantastic, but we weren't recognised as academics because we weren't black enough. I don't know what it was, or that's changed, and I'm pleased. But I've had to experience that. I'm 54 these days. I took 30 years to get recognised, and mainly I get the recognition from overseas. Because in Australia, as an archaeologist, we're challenging the mining company, the governments who are destroying our heritage for the mining boom. And we realise now it was how corrupt it all was. And you think, well, what a waste of a career. But at the same time, it's back here in the universities, there are no Indigenous archaeologists in many of the departments. Here I am at 54, 35 years after I graduated with my honours. So I'm pleased to be here. There's a lot of change that needs to happen. Proud to be here with my colleagues now. And I forgive those former ones who kept me out. But there's enormous opportunity, and sorry, I've lost that part of that question. There is enormous opportunity. What was the question again? Because I was on it.
Oh, it's about how can we better incorporate Indigenous knowledge.
Okay, so the best ways to incorporate Indigenous knowledge is to get involvement of Indigenous peoples. We're not only our elders, but some of us are now qualified, overqualified, with experience. And accept that we may need to, partnerships may need to, others who are teaching in our space and appropriate our space may need to leave. The more engagement you do with communities and that, the more opportunities arise. It's about equitable partnerships and the Western discipline. And I would say the improvement of Indigenous engagement and equity in ANU would be by, in these history departments, the Aboriginal areas, anything teaching the Indigenous, stop and think, we don't teach this unless we have an Indigenous person. Stop the prejudice, stop the misogyny, stop the greed, and stop the appropriation. I say to all institutions, revelling in this world surge of Indigenous popularity, our knowledges, our truths, our history, and our humanity, if you like, and ability to survive. I think now more than ever, it's important for the old and new world views, and I say that ours being the old world view, and the Western being the new, to come together, because we need to for so many reasons. Our geopolitical climate is such that the histories, while that does not repeat, human behaviour does repeat. And we've got a lot of misogynistic men in power. And we know nothing good happens to a dictator. World history shows that repeat of behaviour. And denial of truths, denial of behaviours, particularly when it's obviously that there's greed, incentive, we have to then question our notions of democracy, and academic institutions should not be places to deny democracy, freedom, learning, expression, and at the same time it has to review itself in its levels of appropriation of knowledges and denial of peoples, and Australia's had a shameful history of that, and we can lead the way in changing that. But it is also about bringing cultures and ideas, epistemologies together, and respectful research, ethical research, because we are about people. And if that's Indigenous views and worldviews, to share that. So our world, it wasn't a capitalistic one to plunge, pillage, deny, rape. That's not the future of the world. If we keep going down this path, as Professor John Maynard, an Indigenous academic, what we call academic, says, this is a fragile earth. We're only here for a blip on time, and our mandate from Indigenous people's knowledge and connection to country is through our laws of looking after country. We're here for a short time, and we have to look after the place and peoples. And if we are to survive, then it is time we all come together. More than important, and we have the ability to do that. Humanity does with our intelligence, and I think to see the signs. But as Australian National University, the leading national university in the country, which I'm so proud of, we can lead the way far more further by being frank, fearless, truthful, and engaging, caring, and ethical. Yeah, I'm very proud of my School of Archaeology and Anthropology here at ANU. We have now been, with our Indigenous Studies, bringing our elders in. We started doing this, I introduced to the ANU sometime back, the Canberra project, where we said we've got all these places to visit. We run tours, Uncle Wally Bell, Marnie Matilda, Dr Matilda House, etc., and the other elders over the years. But we said, and the Vice-Chancellor at the time, we are a living culture. We need now to improve this situation, to acknowledge that our cultures, the local custodians, the Ngunnawal Ngambri peoples, are still here today, as all Indigenous cultures are. So that we have welcomes to country now. I made sure we did this. I was the one who initiated that with the Canberra when we developed the Canberra project, and said we need to have elders constantly. I'm working for the Vice-Chancellor through my role now to develop a memorandum of understanding with all our South Coast elders and communities for our Kyola campus, which we've been utilising, appropriating their country. I was part of the archaeologists who took away all their artefacts. So we're negotiating to do the repatriation. My school is initiating that. We're doing wonderful things, and I'm very proud of that. And we're going to lead the School of Archaeology and Anthropology to lead the rest of the way of how to do it properly by inclusion, listening, and back to your question about the acknowledgements to country. Part of that is to stop, show respect if you're coming into someone's country, to stop, listen, learn, and then Tanabe, as Auntie Carolyn Briggs says, to celebrate. Because when you leave, then you can come back as a member of this community and family, because everyone has a place in Aboriginal society. So some of these things are humanitarian things. It's about respect. It's about relationships. And yes, I think we can improve. We've come a long way. So I'm very proud where my school's going and is coming. But we've had a past. We're the mobs who took the Mungo remains, held them through this, not this school, but the archaeologists, you know. So there's a history changing, and Aboriginal people don't forget. So we need to be able to do that. But we're also leading our way, not just with our non-Indigenous and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander relationships. We're a multicultural nation, and we need to be able to, how you treat some of our lowest socio-economic communities in the academia or on the ground is also a reflection of how we deal and treat ourselves within our overall society. So that's the bigger picture stuff. So my school's working closely with the communities, we're engaging, we're consulting, doing the right thing. It's the policy we wrote for the government about engaging with Indigenous peoples. It's called Ask First, a guide to consulting and assessing Indigenous heritage values. But the thing is, yeah, it's about consulting and approvals. And no means no. Don't go out the back door and try again. You know, those days are gone. So, no, I'm very proud of my school. I'm very proud to be here, and I'm looking forward to leading and working with my colleagues and students to show the way how Australian archaeology ethically can be run. And if doing so, we'll roll it out to the rest of the university or others. It's time we have the capacity to lead by example. I'm proud to be a part of it.
Sounds really exciting.
It is.
I'm excited for the prospect.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here too, Claire. Yeah. Come and do some archaeology there, Rob. Where are you from?
I'm from Micronesia.
Micronesia.
Yeah,
Any island? Which one?
Kiribati.
Okay, I've heard of that. I haven't been.
Yeah.
Sikara boy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's pretty small.
Yeah. Good stuff. I grew up in the Torres Strait Islands, and actually along the Barrier Reef, my dad was a lighthouse keeper, so I grew up on 5 different islands. And I am actually Torres Strait Islander and Stradbroke Islander. I just found my family. I'm a stolen gen. I found my family last year at 53. It's good to be alive. That's my next journey, tracking down all my family. Yeah. I would love to see an independent Indigenous research centre, like the National Centre for Indigenous Studies, free doing our own teaching, our own professors, dealing with our own ethics and issues, and leading in so many paths that we've not had the chance. Imagine an Indigenous institution, like we have at the National Centre of Indigenous Studies, where we're creating aspects. So what I'm doing part of here is looking at, and as my PhD is now, It's one place, many stories. Indigenous community archaeologies from within. We've been doing it a long time, but what about to say, what are the aspirations of our communities? Research, needs, climate change in the Torres Strait, the Pacific, the rising levels. How are we going to deal with those issues? They're the pressing points. Not just about who's the oldest, biggest, They're important. As I was saying recently, the peopling of the world is important because it's about survival. And it's about caring for place and country, and now more those old world principles and knowledges and connections to country are important than ever. I'd love to see the university with hundreds of Indigenous students. I'd like to see myself as professor of the School of Archaeology one day. I'd like to see more Indigenous staff, but interactions, joint projects, acknowledgements of our communities that we utilise the resources, the peoples, the lands, the resources, Indigenous knowledges, epistemologies, histories, expanded, but to build Australia as a nation we want, in our concepts, our thoughts, our actions, our partnerships, and having everyone benefit. I personally would love to see a system of student unionism, such as PARSA is doing now, that there's free independent students talking about the issues that are relevant to us, talking about the issues that have been relevant for me for the last 36 years, and how Indigenous students are being treated here. Good and bad, but there's many. Let's have that conversation. Let's continue that dialogue. And I would criticise any university or administration that shuts and diminishes the voices. By doing so, you've got fear, and you should, because it's not tolerable, and those of us who don't fear will take action.